My brother Tyson inherited the penthouse overlooking Millennium Park, valued at $4.5 million, along with the entire stock portfolio. I inherited the condemned warehouse on the south side that has been abandoned since the 90s. When the lawyer read those words out loud, my sister-in-law Brittany laughed so hard she choked on her sparkling water. She told me it was poetic justice that the family scavenger finally got a pile of trash to call her own. Tyson threw a check for $5,000 across the mahogany table and told me to sign away my rights and disappear because I was embarrassing him. He thought he had won. He thought he had stripped me of everything. But what neither of them knew was that the run-down brick building they mocked was not empty. When I unlocked those rusted doors that night, I did not find rats or debris. I found a legacy that would turn their multi-million-dollar penthouse into pocket change. My name is Jasmine. I am 34 years old, and I am about to teach my greedy family a brutal lesson in valuation. Before I tell you what was hidden beneath the floorboards, please hit that like button and subscribe. If you have ever been underestimated by the very people who were supposed to protect you. The air in the conference room on the 42nd floor smelled of expensive leather and old money. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline gleamed under the winter sun, but inside, the temperature felt like absolute zero. I sat in the corner chair, clutching my worn coat around me, while my brother Tyson and his wife Brittany occupied the center of the room like royalty holding court. Tyson was checking his watch every 30 seconds, his bespoke suit perfectly tailored to his athletic frame, while Brittany scrolled through her phone with a bored expression, her manicured fingers tapping loudly against the glass screen. They did not look like people who had just buried their father 3 days ago. They looked like investors waiting for a market opening bell. Mr. Henderson, the family attorney, cleared his throat and adjusted his spectacles. He looked at me with a softness in his eyes that I hated because it felt like pity. He began to read the last will and testament of Otis Jenkins. I held my breath. I did not want money. I just wanted the house. The brownstone in Bronzeville, where I had spent the last 5 years, changing Dad's bedsheets, managing his medication, and listening to his stories while his mind slowly faded. That house was my home. To my son Tyson. Mr. Henderson read, his voice steady but grim. I leave the entirety of my investment portfolio and the deed to the penthouse at the Millennium Tower. Tyson did not even blink. He just nodded, as if this was the only logical outcome in the universe. Of course the golden child would get the crown jewels. Brittany squeezed his hand and whispered loud enough for me to hear, "Finally, we can upgrade the kitchen." Mr. Henderson paused and turned his gaze toward me. "And to my daughter Jasmine, I leave the property located at District 9, formerly known as Otis Auto Repair and Storage, along with all contents therein." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds before Brittany let out a sharp, cruel laugh. She covered her mouth, but her eyes were dancing with malice. "Oh my God," she gasped. "The junkyard! Dad left her the literal junkyard. That is absolutely hilarious." My stomach dropped to the floor. That warehouse had been closed for 15 years. It was in a neighborhood where even the police hesitated to patrol at night. It was a liability, not an asset. Mr. Henderson continued quickly. "Furthermore, the family residence in Bronzeville is to be included in the general estate assets which are bequeathed to Tyson." Everything stopped. The room spun. I stood up, my legs trembling. "There must be a mistake," I said, my voice sounding small in the cavernous room. "Dad promised me the house. He knew I have nowhere else to go. I have lived there for 5 years taking care of him while Tyson was in New York." Tyson finally looked at me. His eyes were cold, devoid of any brotherly warmth. "There is no mistake, Jasmine. Dad knew you are not capable of maintaining a property like the brownstone. The taxes alone would drown you in a month with that little salary you make digging through old, dusty basements." "I am an archivist, an appraiser," I said, fighting the tears stinging my eyes. "I preserve history." "You are a glorified hoarder," Tyson shot back, leaning back in his chair. And now you have a warehouse to hoard things in. It is fitting, really. Brittany chimed in, smoothing her designer skirt. Honestly, Jasmine, you should be grateful. Most families would not give anything to the black sheep who barely contributes. At least you have a place to store your boxes now. Oh wait, does that place even have a roof? The disrespect was physical. It felt like a slap. I looked at Mr. Henderson, hoping for some intervention, but he just looked down at his papers, helpless against the legal text. Tyson reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the only sound in the room. He ripped the check out and slid it across the polished table toward me. It stopped right at the edge in front of me. $5,000. Here is the deal, Tyson said, his voice dripping with arrogance. I have a buyer lined up for that warehouse land. A developer wants to turn it into a parking lot for the condos next door, but I need you to sign the deed over to me immediately so I can bundle the sale. This $5,000 is for you. Take it. Buy some clothes that do not look like they came from a thrift store, find a cheap apartment and start over. I looked at the check. $5,000 for 5 years of servitude. $5,000 for wiping Dad's brow when he was sweating from fever, while Tyson could not be bothered to answer a FaceTime call. $5,000 to erase my existence. I am not selling, I said quietly. Excuse me, Tyson said, leaning forward, his eyes narrowing. I picked up the check. I said, I am not selling. That warehouse was Dad's first business. It meant something to him. It is a pile of rotting bricks in the hood, Jasmine, Tyson shouted, slamming his hand on the table, making Brittany jump. It is worth nothing, just like your sentimental attachment to garbage. Do not be stupid. You have no money. You have no home. I am offering you a lifeline. I looked him dead in the eye. For the first time in years, the fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard anger. I ripped the check in half. Then I ripped it again. I let the pieces flutter down onto the expensive Persian rug. I do not want your crumbs, Tyson. And I am not signing anything. Tyson stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket. His face was red with suppressed rage. Brittany looked from him to me, a sneer curling her lip. You are making a huge mistake, Jasmine, she hissed. If you are not signing, Tyson said, his voice dangerously low, then you are no longer my sister. You are just an obstacle. And since the brownstone is legally mine as of this moment, I want you out. What? I asked, my breath catching. You heard me. You are trespassing. I want your things out of my house by tonight. I am changing the locks at midnight. If you are still there, I am calling the police to have you removed. But it is snowing, I whispered. A blizzard is coming tonight. Then you better hurry, Tyson said, checking his watch again, as if he was late for a lunch reservation. Go sleep in your precious warehouse. See how much that sentimental history keeps you warm. He turned his back on me and walked out of the room, Brittany trailing behind him like a loyal shadow. She paused at the door, looking me up and down with pure disgust. Good luck with the rats, Jasmine, she said. Try not to let them eat you alive. I stood there alone in the office, the torn pieces of the check at my feet. I had nothing. No money, no home, and a family that viewed me as a parasite. I walked out into the biting Chicago wind, my heart pounding with a mixture of grief and fury. I drove my rusted sedan toward the south side, the snow beginning to fall in thick, heavy sheets. I did not know then that Tyson had just handed me the keys to a kingdom he could not even imagine. I pulled up to the looming metal gates of the warehouse number 9. It looked like a beast sleeping in the dark. I cut the padlock with the bolt cutters from my trunk and pushed the heavy steel doors open. I expected darkness. I expected emptiness. But when I flipped the breaker switch on the wall, a hum of electricity vibrated through the floorboards beneath my feet. This place was not dead. It was waiting. The wind off Lake Michigan whipped against my face like invisible shards of glass as I stood on the front porch of the brownstone. My fingers were numb inside my thin gloves, fumbling with the brass key that had opened this door for 34 years. It would not turn. I jiggled it, thinking the cold had frozen the mechanism, but then I heard the distinct click of the deadbolt sliding back from the inside. The heavy oak door cracked open just an inch, held by the security chain. Tyson's face appeared in the gap, illuminated by the warm golden light of the foyer. He was holding a glass of cognac, swirling the amber liquid casually, while I shivered violently on the welcome mat. "Tyson, please let me in," I said, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. "My clothes are in there. Dad's photo albums. My laptop. I have nowhere else to go tonight." Tyson took a sip of his drink and sighed as if I were a solicitor trying to sell him a subscription he did not want. "I told you at the lawyer's office, Jasmine. You do not live here anymore. This property is now a high-value asset in my portfolio, and I cannot have unauthorized tenants establishing residency. It complicates the insurance." He closed the door for a brief second. I thought he was unlatching the chain to let me in. Instead, the door swung open fully, and he kicked a large black suitcase across the threshold. It skidded over the icy porch steps and landed with a heavy thud in the snowbank, accumulating on the walkway. The zipper burst open, spilling my sweaters and scarves into the wet gray slush. "There is your stuff," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I packed it myself. Consider it a courtesy. Now get off my property before I call security. The neighbors are starting to watch, and you are lowering the property value." Before I could say another word, he slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent, frozen street. I stood there for a moment, staring at the solid wood that separated me from the only warmth I had known. I was 34 years old. I was a respected professional in my field. And I was standing in a blizzard watching my underwear soak up dirty slush while my brother drank $50 brandy inside the house I had kept clean for 5 years. I dragged the heavy suitcase to my car, a 10-year-old sedan with a heater that only worked when the engine was redlining. My hands were shaking so badly, it took me 3 tries to start the ignition. As the engine sputtered to life, I looked back at the house one last time. I saw Brittany's silhouette in the upstairs window watching me. She pulled the curtains shut. That was the moment the sadness in my chest hardened into something cold and sharp. I did not cry. I simply put the car in drive and headed south. The drive to District 9 took 40 minutes, but it felt like descending into a different world. The salt trucks did not come down here. The manicured lawns of the Gold Coast gave way to boarded-up storefronts and streetlights that flickered ominously. This was the Chicago they did not show in tourism brochures. This was where my father Otis had started his empire of grease and gears back in the 80s before the neighborhood fell apart. I pulled up to the address listed on the deed. The headlights of my car cut through the swirling snow, revealing a monstrosity of corrugated metal and weathered brick. The sign above the gate was half falling off, reading only Otis Auto, distinct letters missing like gaps in a smile. The chain-link fence was topped with razor wire, but someone had cut a hole in the side large enough for a person to crawl through. Graffiti covered every inch of the lower walls, territorial markings of local gangs that made my stomach knot with anxiety. "I cannot do this," I whispered to the empty car. "I cannot sleep here." But then I looked at my phone. My bank account balance was $42. The hotels in the city were fully booked for a convention, and even the motels on the outskirts were charging premium rates due to the storm. I had no choice. It was either this metal tomb or freezing to death in my car. I grabbed the bolt cutters from my trunk and attacked the rusted padlock on the main rolling door. It took every ounce of strength I had, groaning with effort until the metal finally snapped. I heaved the rolling door up. It screeched in protest, a metal-on-metal shriek that probably woke up every stray dog within 3 blocks. I drove my car inside and pulled the door down behind me, plunging myself into absolute darkness. I turned on my phone flashlight and stepped out. The air inside was stale, smelling of old oil, dry rot, and something dead. The beam of light danced across the space, revealing chaos. Piles of old tires reached toward the ceiling. Rusted car parts were scattered across the concrete floor like bones in a graveyard. In the corner, I saw a pair of red eyes reflect the light before scuttling away into the shadows. Rats. Huge ones. I sank onto the hood of my car, burying my face in my hands. This was it. This was my inheritance. A rat-infested box in the middle of a war zone. Tyson was right. I was the queen of the junkyard. But as the silence settled around me, a memory surfaced. I was 10 years old, standing in this very garage holding a flashlight for my father while he worked on a transmission. He had wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag and pointed to the steel beams overhead. "Jasmine, look at those beams," he had said, his voice echoing in the vast space. "People look at this place and see a dirty garage. But look at the structure. Look at the foundation. I poured this concrete 3 feet thick. I reinforced these walls with steel rebar. Never judge a building by its paint job, baby girl. Structure is what survives the storm." I lifted my head. I wiped the tears from my cheeks and pointed my flashlight at the floor. The concrete was dirty, yes, covered in dust and oil stains. But it was not cracked, not a single fissure. In Chicago, where the ground freezes and thaws every year, concrete always cracks. But this floor was pristine. I walked toward the back of the warehouse where my father's old workbench still stood covered in a thick gray blanket of dust. I ran my gloved hand over the surface. Tools were hanging on the pegboard exactly where he had left them 15 years ago. It felt like walking into a time capsule. My foot kicked something near the base of the workbench. It was a thick rubber mat. I nudged it aside and frowned. Underneath the mat, running along the base of the wall, was a conduit pipe. It was thick, heavy-duty industrial piping, the kind used for high-voltage lines. Why would a simple auto repair shop need this kind of power capacity, I wondered aloud. I followed the conduit with my light. It led behind a massive red tool chest that was bolted to the floor. I tried to push the chest, but it would not budge. It was solid as a rock. I leaned closer, examining the side of the chest. There was no seam. It was not just heavy, it was anchored. I looked around for a breaker box. I found it on the adjacent wall, covered in cobwebs. I opened the panel, expecting to see blown fuses and rusted wires. Instead, I saw a modern digital meter, and the numbers were glowing red. The power was on. Not just on. The meter showed a steady, significant draw of electricity. Something in this abandoned warehouse was consuming power, and had been for years. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, louder than the wind howling outside. I went back to the tool chest. If this was anchored, it was anchored for a reason. I began pulling the drawers open one by one. Wrenches, screwdrivers, socket sets. Nothing unusual. I reached the bottom drawer. It was empty. But when I pressed my hand against the bottom of the drawer, it felt different. It was warmer than the rest of the metal. I felt around the edges and my fingers brushed against a small indentation, a keypad hidden on the underside of the drawer lip. I froze. A keypad. In a toolbox from the 90s. I crouched down, shining my light up under the lip. It was a modern biometric pad with a number code backup. It was clean, free of dust, as if someone had wiped it recently. My father had been dead for 2 weeks. Before that, he had been in the hospital for months. Who had been here? I hesitated, my finger hovering over the keys. If I entered the wrong code, would an alarm sound? Would the police come? Or worse, would the people Tyson owed money to show up? But then I thought of Tyson's smirk. I thought of my clothes in the slush. I thought of Brittany laughing at me. I had nothing left to lose. I typed in the only set of numbers that meant anything to my father. My birthday. 061989. There was a soft beep. Then a heavy hydraulic hiss filled the room, making me jump back. The massive tool chest did not open. It swung outward, away from the wall, like a heavy vault door. Behind it was not a brick wall but a stainless steel panel with a single button illuminated in blue. I stared at it, my breath misting in the cold air. The wind rattled the tin roof above me, but down here in the corner, the hum of machinery was steady and strong. Dad did not leave me a garage, he left me a fortress. I reached out and pressed the blue button. The floor beneath my feet began to vibrate. A section of the concrete floor, 10 feet by 10 feet, started to lower into the ground. It was an elevator. A vehicle elevator. I stepped to the edge of the pit, looking down into the abyss. As the platform descended, rows of motion sensor lights flickered to life one by one, revealing a space that extended far beyond the footprint of the warehouse above. And that is when I saw the chrome bumper gleaming under the LED lights. Then a hood scoop. Then the undeniable curve of a classic American muscle car. I was not looking at a basement. I was looking at a sanctuary. And I was about to descend into the belly of the beast. The floor beneath me shuddered with a deep mechanical groan that vibrated through the soles of my boots. I grabbed the edge of the tool chest for balance as the concrete square I was standing on detached itself from the surrounding foundation. For a terrifying second, I thought the ground was collapsing under the weight of the decaying building, but then the descent became smooth and controlled. I was on a heavy-duty hydraulic lift, the kind used in industrial manufacturing, and I was sinking into the earth. The darkness of the warehouse above grew smaller and smaller until it was just a square of dim light far overhead. The air around me changed. The smell of oil and old dust vanished, replaced by the crisp, sterile scent of filtered climate-controlled air. I counted the seconds as I descended. 1, 2, 3. By the time the platform came to a soft halt, I estimated I was at least 30 feet underground. I stood in absolute darkness, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I raised my phone flashlight, but before I could swipe the screen, a bank of overhead lights flickered to life. Then another bank, and another. The lights stretched out in front of me, row after row, illuminating a space that was 3 times the size of the warehouse above. I dropped my phone. The sound of it hitting the epoxy-coated floor echoed in the vast silence, but I barely heard it. My breath caught in my throat and refused to let go. I was not standing in a basement. I was standing in a cathedral. The floor was painted a pristine glossy white, reflecting the overhead LED lights like a mirror. And resting on that white floor, parked in perfect military precision, were rows of sleeping giants. My father Otis had not left me a pile of junk. He had left me a museum. I took a shaky step forward, my eyes trying to process the sheer scale of what lay before me. There were at least 40 vehicles here. But these were not just used cars. They were American muscle cars from the golden era of Detroit steel, and every single one of them looked like it had just rolled off the assembly line. To my left sat a 1969 Chevrolet Camaro Z28 in Fathom Green, its racing stripes sharp and flawless. Next to it was a 1970 Chevelle SS 454, its cowl induction hood gleaming under the lights. I walked down the aisle, my hand hovering over the fenders, but afraid to touch them. As an appraiser, I had handled artifacts worth millions. I had verified the provenance of colonial furniture and Civil War swords. But nothing in my career had prepared me for this. This was not a collection. This was an obsession. I stopped in front of a Dodge Charger RT. The window sticker was still on the glass. It was original. I looked at the tires. They were polyglass reproduction tires, correct for the period. My father had not just stored these cars, he had maintained them. He had preserved them in a time capsule buried beneath the rot and decay of the South Side. I moved deeper into the vault, my professional brain kicking into overdrive. I began to calculate. A mint-condition Chevelle could fetch $200,000 at auction. A Plymouth Hemi-Cuda could go for millions. The numbers began to swirl in my head, adding up to a sum that made my knees weak. Tyson had thrown me out for a penthouse worth $4 million. I was walking past $10 million in the first 2 rows alone. Then I saw it. It was parked on a raised circular platform at the far end of the vault, separated from the others like a king on a throne. My breath hitched. I approached it slowly, as if it were a wild animal. It was a 1967 Shelby GT 500 Super Snake. I knew this car. Not this specific one, but the legend of it. Only one was ever officially made with the 427 racing engine. If this was a recreation, it was a masterpiece. But knowing my father, knowing his obsession with structure and truth, I had a feeling it was not a fake. I circled the vehicle, checking the VIN plate on the inner fender. I pulled a jeweler's loop from my pocket, which I always carried, and inspected the rivets. They were aged correctly. The patina on the engine block was consistent. My hand started to shake. If this was the lost prototype or a factory-verified second production model, its value was incalculable. Conservative estimate, $3 million. Aggressive auction estimate, $5 million. And that was just one car. I leaned against the cold fender of the Shelby, trying to keep myself upright. My family had treated me like a beggar. They had thrown $5,000 at me like I was a charity case. And all the while I was standing on top of a fortune that could buy their entire lifestyle 10 times over. "Why did you do this, Dad?" I whispered to the empty room. "Why hide it? Why live in a modest brownstone driving a beat-up truck when you had the crown jewels of the automotive world buried in your backyard?" I saw a small desk in the corner of the room near a ventilation unit. It was Dad's old metal desk from the shop upstairs, but it had been cleaned and polished. I walked over and sat in his chair. The leather creaked, a familiar sound that brought tears to my eyes. On the desktop sat a single leather-bound notebook. It was not a ledger. It was a journal. I opened it, the pages crinkling softly. The handwriting was unmistakably his strong block letters written in blue ink. I started reading. October 14th, 1982. The bank took Mr. Johnson's home today. They gave him 30 days to vacate. He needed cash to move his family to a rental. He offered me his 65 GTO. He was crying Otis. He said he bought it when his son was born. I paid him double what the dealer offered. I promised him I would keep it safe. I promised him it would not be scrapped or parted out. I turned the page. May 3rd, 1990. The city is bulldozing the block on 63rd Street. They say it is for urban renewal, but we know it is removal. Mrs. Davis has to sell her husband's Mustang. It is all she has left of him. I took it. I put it in the vault. I told her it is sleeping until the world wakes up. I read entry after entry. Each car in this room was not just a vehicle. It was a tragedy. My father had not collected these cars for vanity or greed. He had become the guardian of our community's assets during its darkest times. When the system tried to strip Black families of their wealth, their homes, and their prized possessions, my father stepped in. He bought their treasures not to flip them for a profit, but to hold them. He was preserving the history that the world wanted to erase. I looked up from the book. My vision blurred with tears. Tyson saw a warehouse. Brittany saw a parking lot. But my father saw a bank vault for the people who could not get a loan. He had built an ark to save these machines from the flood of gentrification and poverty. And he had left it to me. Not because I was the scrap collector, but because I was the only one who would understand the difference between price and value. I closed the journal and stood up. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone, replaced by a burning, fierce clarity. Tyson wanted a war. He wanted to crush me with his lawyers and his money. He had no idea what he had just started. I looked at the Shelby. I looked at the rows of gleaming chrome. I was not just Jasmine the appraiser anymore. I was the curator of the Otis Vault, and I was about to invite the world to the grand opening. The morning sun struggled to push through the grime-coated windows of the warehouse, but it was enough to wake me from a restless sleep in the driver's seat of my sedan. My neck was stiff and my breath fogged in the frigid air, but as soon as I opened my eyes, the memory of what lay beneath the concrete floor rushed back to me. I was not a homeless woman sleeping in a junk heap. I was the guardian of a $60 million secret. I climbed out of the car and stretched, trying to rub the warmth back into my limbs. I had spent the night researching the current market value of a 1967 Shelby, and the numbers were still dancing in my head. But my moment of quiet triumph was shattered by the aggressive honking of a car horn outside the main gate. It was not a friendly beep. It was a persistent, rhythmic blare that demanded attention. I walked to the heavy rolling door and peered through a crack in the metal. A pristine white Range Rover was idling in the slush outside its exhaust, puffing white clouds into the gray morning. Standing next to it in a beige cashmere coat that probably cost more than my car was Brittany. Beside her stood a man in a neon yellow safety vest, holding a clipboard and a laser measuring tool. My stomach tightened. They had not wasted any time. I grabbed a heavy wrench from the workbench, not because I intended to use it, but because the weight of it in my hand made me feel less like a victim. I unlocked the side personnel door and stepped out into the biting wind. Brittany stopped scrolling on her phone and looked up. Her face twisted into a mask of exaggerated pity as she took in my wrinkled clothes and messy hair. "Good morning, Jasmine," she called out, her voice shrill against the industrial hum of the neighborhood. "I brought you coffee, but I see you are already busy playing squatter." She gestured to the man beside her. "This is Mike. He is the contractor for the Otis Tower project. We need to get inside to measure the square footage for the demolition permit." I did not move. I planted my feet firmly on the cracked pavement blocking the entrance. "There will be no demolition, Brittany. I told Tyson yesterday. This property is not for sale." Brittany laughed, a cold, sharp sound that grated on my nerves. She signaled to Mike, who looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Jasmine, honey, let us be realistic. Tyson practically owns this block. He has investors lined up. We are building a luxury high-rise next door, and this eyesore you are standing in is going to be the parking structure. We are doing you a favor. Tyson is willing to give you $10,000 now. That is double what he offered yesterday. Take it and go find a motel before you freeze to death." I looked at the contractor. "Mike, does your client realize that she is asking you to trespass on private property? The deed to this warehouse is in my name. It was probated yesterday. If you step 1 foot past this gate, I will have you arrested." Mike lowered his laser measure and looked at Brittany. "You said you had the owner consent, ma'am." Brittany's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed with her beige coat. She marched up to the gate, gripping the chain-link fence with her gloved hands. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little leech. You think because Daddy left you a pile of bricks, you are suddenly a player. You are nothing. You are living like a rat in a sewer. Look at you. You smell like grease and desperation." I stepped closer until we were face to face, separated only by the rusted wire. "I would rather smell like grease than greed, Brittany. Go home." Her eyes narrowed into slits. "You want to play hardball, Jasmine? Fine. Let us play. You think you can live here? I give it 24 hours. I am calling the city building inspector right now. I know for a fact this place has asbestos, lead paint, and faulty wiring. I will have this building condemned by noon. They will red tag the doors and drag you out by your hair. You cannot fight Tyson. He has the mayor on speed dial. You have a wrench." She pulled out her phone and started dialing purposefully loud. "Yes, hello. I would like to report a severe code violation at District 9. Yes, a squatter is living in a commercial structure with no heat or running water. It is a fire hazard." My heart hammered against my ribs. She was right about one thing. If the city inspectors came inside, they would snoop. If they found the vault, the secret would be out. Tyson would find a way to seize it, claiming the contents were part of the general estate. I needed time. I needed to secure the perimeter before anyone official set foot on this land. I stared at her, cold and unblinking. "Make the call, Brittany. But tell them to check the property records carefully, because if you file a false report of a code violation against a certified historic structure, you could lose your real estate license." Brittany froze, her thumb hovering over the call button. "Historic structure," she scoffed. "Since when is this dump historic? Since Dad filed the paperwork in 1995, I lied, keeping my voice steady. It was a bluff, a desperate gamble, based on a stack of old papers I had seen on the desk downstairs, but I prayed she did not know enough about the property history to call me on it. He registered it as a landmark of minority-owned industry in the South Side. If you send an inspector here, you are harassing a protected site. Do you want that kind of press for your new luxury tower?" Brittany lowered the phone slowly. The doubt in her eyes was the first victory I had tasted in days. She did not know if I was lying, and she could not risk a PR scandal before the groundbreaking ceremony. She signaled to Mike to get back in the car. "You are lying," she spat, "but I will find out. And when I do, I will personally drive the bulldozer that flattens this place with you inside it. Enjoy your rats, Jasmine." She slammed the car door, and the Range Rover peeled away, leaving tire tracks in the dirty snow. I watched until they turned the corner before my knees finally gave out. I leaned against the cold brick wall, gasping for air. That was too close. They were not just going to leave me alone. They were going to come back with lawyers, inspectors, and maybe even thugs. A chain-link fence and a rusty padlock were not enough to protect the legacy my father had left me. I went back inside and locked the heavy door. I walked to the middle of the warehouse where the floor concealed the elevator. I looked up at the skylights. Someone could climb in. Someone could drill the locks. I needed to turn this place into a fortress, and I needed to do it before the sun went down. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had not called in 2 years. It rang 4 times before a deep voice answered. "Hello, Marcus, it is Jasmine. I need a favor, a big one." There was a pause. "Jasmine, I heard about your pops. I am sorry." "Thank you, Marcus. Listen, I am at the old shop on District 9. I need you to bring your crew." "What kind of job is it?" he asked, his tone shifting from personal to professional. "I need a full perimeter lockdown. I need reinforced steel bars on the skylights. I need motion sensor cameras with cloud backup covering every angle outside and inside. And I need maglocks on the main doors, the kind banks use." Marcus whistled low. "That is some heavy hardware, Jazz. You expecting a war or something?" I looked down at the floor beneath my feet, thinking of the Shelby and the millions of dollars of history sleeping in the dark. "Yes, Marcus," I said softly. "I am expecting a war. Can you do it tonight? It will cost you triple for the rush. I will pay you double that in cash as soon as the job is done. Just get here. And Marcus, bring the big trucks." I hung up and stood in the silence of the warehouse. The fear was still there, simmering in my gut, but it was being overtaken by something else. Adrenaline. Brittany had called me a rat. She was wrong. A rat hides in the dark and hopes to survive. I was not hiding anymore. I was digging in. If they wanted this warehouse, they were going to have to tear it down brick by brick, and I would be standing right here waiting for them. I walked over to the coffee maker my dad had left in the corner and plugged it in. It was going to be a long night. 2 days after I turned the warehouse into a fortress, the real war began, not with a battering ram, but with a piece of paper. I was down in the vault cataloging the engine specs of a 1970 Chevelle whenever the proximity alarm on the front gate triggered. I checked the monitor, expecting to see Brittany again, or maybe even the police. Instead, it was a bored-looking man in a windbreaker holding a thick manila envelope. I went up to the gate, keeping the chain-link fence between us. He did not say hello. He just asked if I was Jasmine Jenkins. When I confirmed my identity, he shoved the envelope through a gap in the fence, mumbled something about being served, and walked back to his car. I tore open the seal, right there in the freezing wind. The bold letters at the top of the first page made my blood run cold. Tyson Jenkins versus Jasmine Jenkins. It was a civil lawsuit. And underneath that was an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order, freezing all assets related to the estate of Otis Jenkins. I ran back inside the warehouse, my hands trembling so hard I dropped the papers twice. I grabbed my laptop and logged into my bank account. The screen flashed red. "Account frozen. Contact your financial institution." I tried my credit card. Declined. I tried the joint account I used to manage Dad's medical bills. Locked. Tyson had not just sued me, he had nuked my financial existence. I had $42 in my wallet and a warehouse full of cars worth millions that I could not sell without exposing the secret. I was sitting on a gold mine, but I could not even buy a sandwich. I read the lawsuit in the dim light of the workbench. The words were a masterclass in cruelty. Tyson was alleging that I had used undue influence over a mentally incapacitated elder to secure the deed to the warehouse property. He claimed that Dad had advanced dementia and did not know what he was signing when he transferred the property rights. It was a lie. A sick, twisted lie. Dad was sharp until the very end. His body failed him, but his mind was a steel trap. Tyson knew that. But Tyson also knew that proving it in court would take months and money that I did not have. He was trying to starve me out. He wanted me to crawl back to him begging for mercy so he could trade a few $1,000s for the deed to the land. He had found out about the rezoning. He knew the city was planning to expand the transit line right past this block, which would triple the land value overnight. He did not care about the cars. He did not even know about them. He just wanted the dirt. I needed a lawyer. But good lawyers cost hundreds of dollars an hour, and I did not even have enough for a bus ticket. I sat in the driver's seat of the Shelby crying tears of pure frustration. I looked around the vault, at the legacy my father had built. He had saved all of this for me, and I was going to lose it because I could not afford a legal defense. Then my eyes landed on my wrist. I was wearing Dad's watch. It was a vintage Rolex Submariner from 1972. He had bought it used from a pawn shop in the 80s and wore it every single day. It was scratched and the bezel was faded, but it was the only thing of his I had left besides the cars. I touched the cold metal against my skin. It felt like a betrayal to even think about it. But then I heard his voice in my head. Structure is what survives the storm, Jasmine. The watch was just a thing. The warehouse was the structure. I drove to the Jewelers Row district downtown, praying my gas tank would last the trip. I walked into a high-end watch dealer, a place with armed guards and velvet ropes. The appraiser looked at my worn clothes with disdain until I placed the Rolex on the counter. His eyebrows shot up. He opened the case back, examined the movement, and offered me $8,000. It was worth 12, and we both knew it, but I did not have the luxury of negotiation. I took the cash. It felt dirty in my hands like blood money. I walked out of the store feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. I had sold a piece of my father to save his soul. With $8,000 in cash in my pocket, I walked 4 blocks to a brownstone office building that had seen better days. The brass plaque outside read, Elias Thorne, Attorney at Law. I had heard about Elias from the old-timers in the neighborhood. They said he was a pit bull who hated big banks and flashy developers. They said he was the only lawyer in Chicago who Tyson Jenkins would be afraid of. I walked into his office, which smelled of stale coffee and pipe tobacco. Piles of case files were stacked on every surface, creating a maze that led to a massive oak desk. Behind it sat a man who looked more like a rumpled history professor than a lawyer. He had wild gray hair and a stain on his tie. I put the stack of cash on his desk. "My name is Jasmine Jenkins," I said. "My brother is trying to steal my inheritance and destroy my father's reputation. I want you to bury him." Elias Thorne looked at the money, then at me. He picked up the lawsuit papers I had brought with me. He put on a pair of reading glasses and scanned the document. He hummed softly as he read. Undue influence. Dementia. Classic move for a greedy relative. He looked up. "Who is the opposing counsel?" "Bradford and Sterling," I answered. Elias let out a dry laugh. "Sharks in $3,000 suits. They fight dirty. They will bury us in paperwork and motions until you run out of money. This $8,000 will buy you about 10 hours of their time." "It buys me you," I said, leaning forward. "And I have something they do not. I have the truth. And I know my brother. He is arrogant. He thinks he has already won. That makes him sloppy." Elias smiled, and for a second he looked dangerous. "I like arrogant opponents. They make the best noises when they fall. Sit down, Miss Jenkins. Let us get to work." We spent the next 6 hours going over every detail of my father's final months. I showed him the medical records I had kept on my phone. I showed him the emails where I updated Tyson on Dad's condition, and Tyson ignored them. But the breakthrough came when Elias asked about the will signing itself. "Who was in the room when your father signed the deed transfer?" Elias asked, tapping his pen against his chin. "Just Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, and a notary," I said. And Dad, was it recorded? Elias asked. I frowned. What do you mean? Elias stood up and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a dusty law book. In the state of Illinois, for estates over a certain value involving real estate transfer, particularly when the grantor is over 70, many firms have a policy of video recording the signing to prevent exactly this kind of lawsuit. It is a liability protection for the law firm. If Henderson is a reputable lawyer, he would have recorded it. He grabbed the lawsuit papers again, flipping to the evidence list. Look here. They listed the deed, the medical records from their paid expert, and the death certificate, but no video. Maybe there is no video, I said, my hope deflating. Or Elias said, his eyes gleaming. Maybe there is a video and it shows your father was perfectly sane. If that video exists and Tyson's lawyers are suppressing it, that is spoliation of evidence. That is a sanctions violation. That could get their case thrown out and get them disbarred. He grabbed his phone. I am going to call Henderson. I am going to bluff him. I am going to tell him we know about the tape. If he hesitates, we have got them. I watched Elias make the call. His voice changed instantly. He became smooth, conversational, almost friendly. He asked about the weather, then casually mentioned the video file number referenced in the billing invoice. There was no billing invoice. Elias was lying. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Elias smiled a predatory grin that made me glad he was on my side. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. We will expect a copy of that footage by 9 a.m. tomorrow, or I will be filing a motion to compel with Judge Sterling. He hung up the phone and looked at me. Henderson panicked. He confirmed the recording exists. He said Tyson took the master copy for safekeeping after the funeral. My blood boiled. Tyson had the video. He had watched Dad sign that paper. He had seen Dad lucid and strong giving me the warehouse, and he had hidden it to paint me as a villain. We have him, Elias said. But we have to move fast. If Tyson knows we are coming for that tape, he might destroy it. We need to get a court order to seize it before he has a chance to run it through a shredder. I stood up, the adrenaline rushing through my veins again. Tyson thought he had paralyzed me. He thought I was broke and helpless. He did not know I had just traded a Rolex for a shark of my own, and he certainly did not know that his own attempt to bury the truth had just handed us the shovel we needed to dig his grave. I walked out of Elias Thorne's office into the cold Chicago night. My wrist felt light without the watch, but my heart felt full. I was going to get that tape. I was going to clear my name. And then I was going to make Tyson pay for every single lie he had told. The war was far from over, but for the first time I had a weapon. The morning after Elias Thorne successfully bluffed Mr. Henderson about the video recording, I did not go to the courthouse. Instead, I stood in the subterranean chill of the vault, waiting for a man who did not officially exist in the phone book. His name was Arthur Sterling, and he was the head of the automotive division at Sotheby's. Elias had called in a favor to get him here. Arthur arrived in an unmarked sedan wearing a nondescript gray suit that belied his status as the man who had auctioned a Ferrari for $48 million last year. I led him through the cluttered warehouse past the rat traps and the piles of old tires to the secret elevator. When I entered the code and the floor began to descend, Arthur remained impassive. But when the lights of the vault flickered on, revealing the rows of pristine American muscle cars, his composure cracked. He took off his glasses and wiped them slowly, staring at the Shelby GT 500 as if he were seeing a ghost. While Arthur began his silent, meticulous inspection. 40 feet underground, my brother Tyson was 40 floors up in his glass office trying to stop his own world from collapsing. He was not the confident titan of industry he pretended to be. He was a drowning man. His fintech startup, which he had bragged about in Forbes magazine, was hemorrhaging cash. The proprietary algorithm he claimed would revolutionize trading was a failure, and his investors were demanding answers. But the real rot was personal. I had always suspected Tyson lived beyond his means, but the truth was far worse. He had leveraged everything. The penthouse was not just mortgaged, it was underwater. He had taken out a third mortgage to cover his margin calls. He owed $2 million to a private equity firm that was known for breaking kneecaps, not contracts, and the payment was due in 10 days. That was why he needed the warehouse. He did not care about the land or the neighborhood. He needed a quick cash injection from the developers to keep the wolves from his door. Back in the vault, Arthur Sterling was moving like a surgeon. He wore white cotton gloves and used a specialized light to examine the paint depth on a 1970 Plymouth Hemi-Cuda. He checked the casting numbers on the engine block. He verified the transmission codes. For 3 hours, he did not speak a word. He just moved from car to car, making notes in a small leather notebook, his frown deepening with every vehicle he inspected. I stood by the elevator, my nerves frayed. What if I was wrong? What if these were just nice old cars worth a few $100,000? That would not be enough to save me from Tyson's legal team. I needed a miracle. Upstairs in the city, Tyson was pacing his office, screaming at his assistant. "Get Henderson on the phone," he yelled, throwing a file across the room. "I want that restraining order enforced. I want the police to raid that warehouse today. Tell them she is running a meth lab. Tell them she is hoarding stolen goods. I do not care what you tell them, just get her out of there so I can bulldoze it." He was unraveling. The cool, sophisticated mask was slipping, revealing the desperate, terrified boy underneath. He knew that if he could not sell the warehouse land by Friday, his entire house of cards would come crashing down. He would be exposed not just as a failure, but as a fraud. Finally, Arthur Sterling closed his notebook. He walked over to where I was standing, his face pale in the harsh fluorescent light. He looked shaken. "Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I have been in this business for 30 years. I have seen private collections in Dubai, in London, in Tokyo. I have seen barns full of Ferraris and caves full of Porsches." He paused, looking back at the Shelby sitting on its pedestal. "But I have never seen anything like this. This is not a car collection. This is a time capsule of American industrial history. Every single vehicle here is a one of one or a one of few. The provenance is impeccable. The condition is unrepeatable." He took a deep breath and looked me in the eye. "You asked me for a valuation. If you were to sell these cars individually over the next few years, you could expect a significant return. But as a collection, as the Otis Jenkins collection, if we bring this to auction in Monterey next month?" He stopped again, seemingly struggling to comprehend the number he was about to say. "My conservative estimate for the starting bid. The floor price is $60 million. My knees gave out. I had to grab the railing of the elevator to keep from falling. $60 million. And that is just the start. Arthur continued, his eyes shining with professional excitement. "With the right marketing, given the story of your father preserving these assets against all odds, we could see bidding reach 75 or even 80 million. Miss Jenkins, your father did not just leave you wealthy. He made you one of the most significant figures in the automotive world overnight." I stared at the cars, blurring through my tears. Tyson was fighting me for a piece of land worth maybe $500,000. He was destroying our family for pennies while I was standing in the middle of a kingdom. "But we have a problem," Arthur said, his tone turning serious. "This collection is too valuable to be kept here. If word gets out, if your brother finds out, he will try to seize it. He will claim it is part of the general estate. You need to move these cars. Tonight, I cannot," I said, panic rising. I said panic. "The lawsuit frozen my accounts. I cannot pay for transport." Arthur smiled, a small, tight smile. "Sotheby's will advance you the cost. We will advance you whatever you need. Security, transport, legal fees. We will take it out of the final sale price. But we need to get these cars to our secure facility in Indiana immediately. I can have a convoy of enclosed transporters here in 4 hours." I thought of Tyson screaming in his office. I thought of Brittany laughing at my clothes. I thought of the $5,000 check. "Do it," I said. "Get them out. But leave one." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" "The Shelby," I said, looking at the blue beast. "Leave the Shelby. I have a special use for that one." Arthur nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. He pulled out his phone and began making calls. Within minutes, the machinery of a global auction house began to turn. I stood there alone for a moment, listening to the hum of the ventilation system. Tyson thought he was playing a game of chess. He thought he was winning because he had taken my pawns. He did not realize that I had just promoted my last piece to a queen, and checkmate was coming fast. The vibration of my phone on the steel workbench felt like an intrusion. I was in the middle of cataloging the engine block of a 1970 Plymouth Superbird when Tyson's name flashed across the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it ring. I considered letting him sweat in his high-rise office while I polished chrome worth more than his entire career. But Arthur Sterling had advised me to play the long game, so I answered. Tyson's voice was different this time. Gone was the shouting. Gone was the arrogance. In its place was a smooth, practiced warmth that set my teeth on edge. He invited me to coffee, not at the office but at Le Ciel, a bistro on the Magnificent Mile, where a cup of tea cost $12 and the waiters wore tuxedos. He said we needed to talk about Dad, too. He said he wanted to make things right. I walked into the cafe an hour later wearing my best clean sweater, which still looked threadbare compared to the designer coats hanging in the cloakroom. Tyson and Brittany were seated by the window, a picture of grieving affluence. Brittany was wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and dabbing at dry eyes with a linen napkin. When they saw me, Tyson stood up and actually pulled out a chair for me. The performance was so thick I could almost taste it. "Jasmine." "I am glad you came," Tyson said, signaling the waiter to bring me a menu. "We have been doing a lot of thinking. The stress of the funeral got to all of us. I said some things I regret." Brittany reached across the table and touched my hand. Her fingers were cold. "We just want what is best for the family, Jasmine. We hate seeing you living in that industrial zone. It is not safe. And honestly, it looks bad for all of us." I sipped the water the waiter placed in front of me and waited for the hook. "We are holding a memorial gala for Dad tomorrow night at the penthouse," Tyson said, leaning in confidentially. "It is going to be intimate. Just close friends, family, and a few of my key business partners who admired Dad's work ethic. We want to honor him properly, and we want you there." He slid a heavy cream-colored envelope across the table. Inside was an invitation printed in gold foil. "We want to present a united front." Tyson continued, his eyes scanning my face for any sign of resistance. "In fact, we have drawn up some new paperwork. A family trust. We want to bring the warehouse land into the trust so we can manage it together. If you sign the transfer agreement at the party tomorrow night in front of everyone, it will show that the Jenkins family is strong and undivided. In exchange, we will set you up with a monthly stipend. $2,000 a month. You can get a nice apartment. You can stop playing mechanic." The trap was so obvious it was insulting. They did not want a memorial. They wanted a show. Tyson needed his investors to see that the land for his phantom project was secured. He needed me to sign that deed publicly, so that when the bulldozers rolled in on Monday, nobody could claim the title was disputed. He wanted to get me drunk on expensive champagne, parade me around as the charity case sister, and have me sign away a $60 million fortune for a $2,000 allowance. I looked at the invitation. Then I looked at Tyson. I saw the bead of sweat on his temple despite the air conditioning. I saw the way Brittany's hand tightened around her wine glass. They were terrified. "I will be there," I said softly. Tyson exhaled a breath he had been holding. "Excellent. Really, Jasmine, this is the right choice." "Oh, and one more thing," Brittany chimed in, looking me up and down with a critical eye. "The dress code is black tie formal. We can lend you one of my old dresses if you want. It might be a little tight in the hips, but we can pin it." "No, thank you," I said, standing up. "I have something to wear." I walked out of the cafe feeling their eyes boring into my back. They thought they had just manipulated me into a corner. They thought I was walking into their lion's den as a lamb. They had no idea I was coming back as the hunter. As soon as I was outside, I called Arthur Sterling. The advance funds from Sotheby's had hit my new secure account an hour ago. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I did not go to the department stores where Brittany shopped. I went to a specialized vintage boutique in the Gold Coast, a place that dealt in couture from the 50s and 60s. I was not going to wear a modern dress. I was going to wear history. I spent 3 hours with a stylist who understood exactly what I needed. I found a 1958 black silk gown with a structured bodice and a flowing architectural skirt. It was severe, elegant, and commanded attention. It was a dress that demanded respect. I paired it with long satin gloves and a string of authentic Mikimoto pearls that cost more than Tyson's car. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see the mechanic's daughter. I saw a woman who owned her narrative, but the dress was just the armor. I needed a weapon. I met Elias Thorne in the back of a dimly lit diner later that evening. He slid a thick red folder across the sticky table. "Here it is," Elias said, grinning around a mouthful of fries. "The private investigator earned his fee on this one." "It is all here, Jasmine. The third mortgage documents Tyson signed last month. The notice of default from the bank. The emails between him and the developers admitting that his company is insolvent and the warehouse land is the only thing keeping him out of prison for fraud." I opened the folder. The numbers were staggering. Tyson was not just broke, he was $20 million in the hole. He had been running a Ponzi scheme with his investors, money paying off old debts with new capital, and the music was about to stop. "Bring this to the party," Elias said. "Wait for the right moment. When he tries to hand you that pen, you hand him this folder." I slept in the warehouse that night, but I did not sleep on the car seat. I slept on a cot I had set up next to the Shelby keeping watch over my army. The next evening at 6 o'clock sharp, a knock echoed on the metal rolling door. I pressed the button to open it. A sleek black limousine stretched out in the alleyway, looking out of place amidst the graffiti and trash. The driver, a man with shoulders like a linebacker, stepped out and opened the rear door. "Ms. Jenkins," he said. "Mr. Sterling sent me. We are at your disposal." I stepped out of the shadows. The black silk of my dress caught the light of the street lamp. The pearls at my throat glowed softly. I held the red folder in one hand like a royal decree. I climbed into the back of the limousine, the scent of leather and expensive cologne filling the air. As the driver pulled away from the curb, heading toward the glittering lights of downtown Chicago, I checked my reflection in the window. Tyson wanted a show. He wanted a public signing. He wanted a memorial. I smiled a cold, hard smile that never reached my eyes. I was going to give him exactly what he asked for. I was going to give him a memorial. But it wasn't going to be for our father. It was going to be for him. "To the Millennium Tower," I told the driver. "And do not stop for red lights." The car accelerated, merging onto the highway. I watched the city blur past, preparing myself for the performance of a lifetime. Tonight the golden child would learn that gold is soft and easily bent, but steel forged in fire is unbreakable. The elevator to the penthouse of the Millennium Tower was made of glass, and as it ascended 40 stories above the streets of Chicago, I watched the city shrink beneath me. My reflection in the glass was unrecognizable from the woman who had shivered in a warehouse just days ago. The black vintage silk gown fit like a second skin, and the pearls at my throat felt cool and heavy. I was entering the lion's den, but for the first time I was not afraid of being bitten. I was afraid of nothing because I held the truth in my hand inside a simple red folder. When the doors slid open, the noise of the party hit me like a physical wave. Jazz music, laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses. It was the sound of money. Tyson and Brittany had spared no expense, or at least they wanted everyone to think they hadn't. I stepped into the foyer and the conversation near the entrance died instantly. Heads turned. I saw the confusion in their eyes. They were expecting Jasmine, the mechanic Jasmine, the failure in grease-stained jeans. Instead, they saw someone who looked like she owned the building. Brittany was the first to recover. She marched over her sequined dress shimmering under the chandelier, a tight fake smile plastered on her face. She reached out to hug me, but stopped short when I did not lean in. "Jasmine," she said loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear. I am so glad you could make it. We were worried you might not have anything appropriate to wear. But look at you. Did you find that at a costume shop? It is very retro. I smiled, a genuine amusement bubbling up inside me. It is vintage Brittany. 1958. Dad bought it for Mom for their 10th anniversary. I found it in storage. It is amazing what you can find when you actually look at history, instead of trying to bulldoze it. Brittany's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, gripping my arm with painful force. Come inside. Everyone is dying to see the prodigal sister. She dragged me into the main salon where Tyson was holding court with a group of older men in expensive suits. These were his investors, the men whose money he had squandered. When Tyson saw me, his eyes widened. For a split second, I saw fear. He knew that dress. He knew those pearls. They were reminders of the legacy he was trying to sell off, but he masked it with a booming laugh and spread his arms wide. Jasmine. Everyone look who finally decided to join the family. My little sister. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders, squeezing tight. He smelled of scotch and desperation. Gentlemen, this is Jasmine. She has been going through a tough time lately trying to find her footing. She is currently in between careers, but we are taking care of her. That is what family does, right? The men nodded, murmuring polite assent. One of them, a heavy-set man with a cigar, looked at me with pity. It is good of you to look after her, Tyson. Not many brothers would be so generous. I felt Tyson's grip tighten, warning me to play along. I said nothing. I just smiled and clutched my red folder. The night wore on, a blur of fake condolences and veiled insults. Brittany made sure to introduce me to everyone as her eccentric sister-in-law who lives in an old garage. She offered me appetizers as if I were starving, asking if I got enough to eat down there in the hood. I ate their food and drank their wine, watching the clock. I was waiting for the moment, and Tyson did not disappoint. At 8 o'clock, the music stopped. Tyson tapped a spoon against his champagne glass and stepped onto the small stage that had been set up in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights twinkled behind him, a backdrop he did not own. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice thick with emotion that I knew was performative. We are here to honor my father, Otis Jenkins. He was a great man, a builder, and his dream was always to see this family prosper, to see us build the future. He paused, wiping a non-existent tear. And tonight we are taking a big step toward that future. As many of you know, my company is breaking ground on the Otis Tower next week. It will be a monument to his legacy. And to make that happen, my sister Jasmine has graciously agreed to unite our family assets. She is gifting the land of the old workshop to the project, ensuring that Dad's name will live on in the skyline. Applause broke out. Polite, enthusiastic applause from people who thought they were witnessing a touching family moment. Tyson beckoned to me. Jasmine, come up here. Say a few words. He held out a hand. I walked up the steps, the silk of my dress rustling softly. The room went quiet. Tyson handed me the microphone and then slipped a piece of paper into my hand. I glanced at it. It was a typed speech. I, Jasmine Jenkins, am proud to support my brother's vision. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at Tyson. He was smiling, but his eyes were hard, pleading and threatening all at once. Read it, his eyes said. Read it, or I will destroy you. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. Tyson's smile twitched. I lifted the microphone. My brother talks a lot about legacy, I said, my voice steady and clear, ringing through the silent room. He talks about building monuments. But my father taught me that you cannot build a monument on a foundation of lies. The air in the room changed. The smiles faltered. Tyson took a step forward, reaching for the mic. Jasmine, that is enough. I turned to him, shielding the microphone. No, Tyson. I am not done. You want me to gift you the land. You told these people that I am doing this to support your vision. But you did not tell them why you need it so badly, did you? I turned back to the crowd. My brother is not building a tower to honor our father. He is selling the land to pay off a gambling debt. gasps rippled through the room. Brittany dropped her glass and it shattered on the marble floor, a sharp, explosive sound. "She is drunk!" Tyson shouted, his face turning purple. "She is unstable!" Cut the mic, but I spoke louder over his shouting. I looked directly at the heavy-set investor with the cigar. "Mr. Sterling, I believe you are the lead investor in Tyson's fintech fund. Did you know that the quarterly returns he sent you last week were fabricated? Did you know that this penthouse, the one we are standing in right now, has a foreclosure notice taped to the service elevator downstairs?" "Liar!" Brittany screamed, rushing the stage. "You jealous little witch!" I pulled the red folder from under my arm and held it up. "It is all here. The third mortgage documents, the default notices, the emails from the developers threatening to sue him for fraud. Tyson doesn't own this apartment. The bank does. And as of next Tuesday, he won't even have a key." I tossed the folder into the crowd. It landed at the feet of the investors. One of them bent down and picked it up, opening it immediately. Tyson lunged at me, grabbing my arm. "You ruined everything," he hissed, his face inches from mine, spittle flying from his lips. "I will kill you." But before he could do anything, two large security guards, the ones I had hired to accompany me, stepped out from the shadows and pulled him off. Tyson stumbled back, adjusting his suit, trying to regain dignity that was already gone. The investor looked up from the documents, his face red with fury. "Jenkins, what is this? This says your liquidity is 0. Tyson stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "It is a mistake. She forged them. She is crazy." But the room wasn't listening to him anymore. They were looking at the papers. They were looking at the foreclosure notice. They were looking at the man they thought was a king and realizing he was a jester. I stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I walked past Brittany, who was sobbing on the floor, trying to pick up the pieces of her broken glass. I stopped and looked down at her. "You were right, Brittany," I said quietly. "It is amazing what you can find in the trash. Sometimes you find a dress, and sometimes you find the truth." I walked to the elevator, leaving the chaos behind me. I heard shouting. I heard accusations. I heard the sound of Tyson's world crumbling into dust. As the doors closed, I saw him standing alone on the stage, a spotlight shining on a man who had nothing left to hide behind. The party was over. But for me, the real work was just beginning. The silence in the penthouse did not last. It shattered like the crystal glass Brittany had dropped moments ago. Tyson lunged for me, his face twisted into a mask of pure primal rage. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like a cornered animal. "Give me that microphone!" He screamed, his hands clawing at the air inches from my face, but he never reached me. My security detail. Two men who had been blending into the shadows by the catering station stepped forward with fluid, practiced motion. They intercepted Tyson, effortlessly blocking his path with walls of solid muscle. Tyson bounced off the chest of the larger guard and stumbled back, nearly tripping over the train of Brittany's gown. The guests gasped, shrinking back toward the walls, their champagne flutes forgotten in their hands. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood center stage in my vintage black silk, looking down at the brother who had thrown my luggage into the snow. He was panting heavily, his tie askew, sweat beading on his forehead under the harsh stage lights. "You are finished, Jasmine," he spat, his voice trembling with a mix of fury and terror. "You think a few pieces of paper will stop me? I am Tyson Jenkins. I built this company. These people know who I am." I looked out at the sea of faces. The investors were not looking at Tyson with admiration anymore. They were looking at the red folder that was being passed around like a contagious disease. They were looking at him with suspicion, with anger. "They know who you pretend to be, Tyson," I said into the microphone, my voice calm and amplified, filling every corner of the room. "But I think it is time they saw exactly who you are, and who you are in business with." I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out a small black remote control. I pointed it at the massive projection screen behind me, which had been cycling through a slideshow of our father's life photos that Tyson had curated to manipulate the crowd's emotions. Tyson frozen seeing the remote. "No," he whispered. "Do not." I pressed the button. The image of our father smiling next to his first tow truck vanished. In its place, a high-resolution scan of a bank statement appeared. It was magnified so every zero was visible. The account balance was in bold red font. -$4.2 million. Gasps rippled through the room again, louder this time. "That is the operating account for the Otis Tower project," I explained casually, as if I were giving a business presentation. "As you can see, the capital raised from investors was transferred out 3 days ago." "Where did it go?" I clicked the button again. A new document appeared. It was a wire transfer receipt. Destination: Cayman Islands. Beneficiary: an offshore shell company. Tyson shouted to the tech crew at the back of the room. "Cut the power. Turn it off." But the tech crew did not move. They were staring at the screen too. Or perhaps they just realized that their paychecks were likely never coming. "I am not done, Tyson," I said. "You wanted to talk about partnerships. You wanted to talk about trust. You wanted to present a united front with your lovely wife, Brittany." I looked down at Brittany. She was standing frozen near the buffet table, her face pale. She knew what was coming. She shook her head pleadingly, mouthing the word, "No." I clicked the button one last time. The screen changed. It was not a bank statement this time. It was a series of screenshots from a text message thread. The timestamps were recent, the conversation was intimate, and the sender was Brittany. "He is drowning," one message read. "The bank is taking the penthouse next week. As soon as the wire hits the offshore account, I am filing for divorce. I will meet you in Paris." And the recipient of those messages was listed clearly at the top of the screen. Mark Sterling. The room turned to look at Mark Sterling, the heavy-set investor with the cigar who had spoken so kindly about Tyson earlier. Mark turned a shade of beet red that matched the carpet. He dropped his cigar. Tyson stared at the screen. He blinked once, twice, trying to comprehend the words. He turned slowly to look at Brittany. His wife. His partner. The woman who had laughed while he kicked me out of our home. "Paris," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You were going to leave me." Brittany scrambled to find a defense, but there was none. The evidence was 40 feet wide and glowing in high definition behind me. I lowered the microphone just slightly, addressing the room at large. "My brother and his wife brought you here tonight to celebrate a legacy. They told you that my inheritance, the warehouse on District 9, was a pile of garbage. They mocked me for being a scavenger. They told you I was worthless." I stepped to the edge of the stage, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of the moment settle on their shoulders. But while they were busy spending money they did not have on champagne and appearances, I was doing what my father taught me. I was looking at the structure. I was looking at what was underneath. I gestured to the screen where I had queued up one final image. It was a photograph I had taken just hours ago. The interior of the Otis vault. The rows of gleaming, pristine muscle cars stretching into the distance under the bright LED lights. The Shelby GT500 sat front and center, a blue jewel in a crown of chrome. The room went dead silent. A collective intake of breath sucked the oxygen out of the penthouse. Even Tyson stopped breathing. He stared at the image, his mouth hanging open. He had never been down there. He had never bothered to look. "That is what was inside the garbage dump," I said, my voice ringing with steel. "That is the Otis Jenkins collection. 40 vehicles. Provenance verified. Condition museum quality." I looked directly at Tyson. "You wanted me to sign over the land for $5,000. You wanted to pave over this for a parking lot." I laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Tyson, that blue car in the center. That is a 1967 Shelby Super Snake. There is only one in existence with that engine configuration. The spare tire in the trunk of that car is worth more than this entire empty penthouse. The steering wheel is worth more than your car. And the collection itself? I paused, letting the number hang in the air before I delivered the final blow, is valued at $75 million. Tyson fell to his knees. It was not a figure of speech. His legs simply stopped working. He collapsed onto the marble floor, staring up at me, as if I were a god he had angered. 75 million. The number echoed in his head. He had thrown away a kingdom to chase pennies. I placed the microphone gently on the stage floor. The feedback whine was the only sound in the room. I gathered my silk skirt in one hand and walked down the stairs. The crowd parted for me instantly. They looked at me with awe, with fear, with respect. I was no longer the poor sister. I was the power in the room. I walked past Mark Sterling, who could not meet my eyes. I walked past Brittany, who was sobbing silently, her hands covering her face. I walked past Tyson, who was still on his knees, mumbling to himself. "Jasmine," he croaked, reaching a hand out toward the hem of my dress. "Jasmine, please, we are family." I stopped. I looked down at his hand. The hand that had signed the eviction notice. The hand that had pointed to the door. "No, Tyson," I said softly, so only he could hear. "We share blood, but we are not family. Family protects the legacy. You tried to sell it." I turned and walked toward the elevator. The heavy glass doors slid open, welcoming me. As I turned to press the button for the lobby, I saw the final act of the tragedy play out. The investors shook off their shock. They realized that the money was gone and the man responsible was kneeling on the floor. They swarmed him. Angry voices began to shout, "Where is my money, Jenkins? You are going to jail. I want my capital back tonight." Tyson tried to stand up to defend himself, but he was surrounded. He looked to Brittany for help. He looked to his wife. Brittany stopped crying. She looked at the man being devoured by the sharks he had invited in. She looked at the screen where her betrayal was still glowing. She realized her escape plan to Paris was dead. Her reputation was dead. She walked over to Tyson. He looked up at her eyes filled with desperate hope. "Brittany," he whispered, "help me." Brittany raised her hand and slapped him. It was a vicious, full-force strike that echoed across the room. "You idiot," she screamed, her face twisting into ugliness. "You told me you had it under control. You told me you were rich. You dragged me down with you." She began to hit him again and again, taking out her own greed and failure on the only target she had left. The alliance of the golden child and the trophy wife crumbled into violence and screaming. The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the noise. The silence of the smooth descent was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I watched the numbers count down, 40, 30, 20. With every floor, I felt lighter. I had walked into that building a victim. I was walking out a victor. The cold Chicago night air was waiting for me, but I knew I would never be cold again. I had the fire of truth burning inside me and $75 million of steel waiting to be introduced to the world. The party at the penthouse had ended in ruins, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins refused to let me sleep. I drove back to District 9 under the cover of darkness, the streets empty, except for the occasional patrol car. The warehouse looked different to me now. It was no longer just a cold brick shell. It was a fortress protecting a king's ransom. I parked my car inside and double-checked the magnetic locks on the reinforced steel doors. Marcus and his security crew had done an incredible job. They had installed motion sensors every 10 feet and high-definition night vision cameras that fed directly to my phone and a cloud server. I went up to the small office on the second floor, which overlooked the main shop floor and the entrance. I made a pot of strong coffee and sat in the dark watching the monitors. I knew Tyson. I knew his pride was shattered. And a man with shattered pride and nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind of animal. He would not wait for the courts. He would not wait for the bank to take his keys. He would come for me. It happened at 3 a.m. The silence of the warehouse was broken not by a knock, but by the violent screech of tires on pavement outside. I looked at the monitor. A black SUV with its license plates covered in duct tape had pulled up to the main gate. 3 men jumped out wearing dark hoodies and carrying crowbars. And stumbling out of the passenger seat was a figure I recognized instantly even in the grainy black and white footage. Tyson. He was still wearing his tuxedo from the party, but his tie was gone and his shirt was unbuttoned. He was swaying on his feet holding a red gas can. Beside him, shivering in her sequined gown and a fur coat, was Brittany. She looked terrified, looking over her shoulder, as if she expected the police to jump out of the shadows. I watched as Tyson shouted something at the men, pointing a shaking finger at the main rolling door. He did not just want to break in. He wanted to burn it down. He wanted to destroy the proof of his failure. If he could not have the land, he was going to make sure I could not have the legacy. One of the hired thugs approached the chain-link fence with bolt cutters. He snapped the lock easily and pushed the gate open. They marched toward the building with the confidence of men who are used to intimidating the weak. But they did not know who they were dealing with. They thought this was just an old auto shop. They did not know it was a vault protected by state-of-the-art security. I waited until they were halfway across the lot. Then I pressed a single button on my laptop. Instantly, the warehouse exterior was flooded with blinding white light. 4 industrial floodlights mounted on the roof corners snapped on, turning night into day. The thugs froze, throwing their hands up to shield their eyes. Tyson staggered back, dropping the gas can. At the same moment, a deafening siren began to wail. It was an ear-splitting sound designed to disorient and panic intruders. I picked up the microphone connected to the external PA system. My voice boomed out into the cold night air, amplified and distorted slightly by the speakers, making me sound like a judgment from above. "Go home, Tyson," I said. "The police have already been alerted. You are trespassing on private property." Tyson looked up at the floodlights, his face twisted in a rictus of hate. He grabbed a crowbar from one of the thugs and ran toward the door, screaming my name. "Open this door, Jasmine! You stole this from me. It is mine." He began to batter the steel door with the crowbar. Clang, clang, clang. The sound was pathetic against the reinforced metal. He was like a child throwing a tantrum against a tank. The thugs, seeing that the element of surprise was gone and that they were being recorded by the cameras pointed conspicuously at them, exchanged nervous glances. They were paid to break legs, not to get arrested on camera. One of them grabbed Tyson by the shoulder, trying to pull him back. "Let us go, man. The cops are coming." Tyson shoved him away. "No, burn it. Burn it all." He picked up the gas can and started splashing gasoline onto the concrete ramp leading to the door. He was fumbling with a lighter, his hands shaking so badly he could not get a spark. Brittany was screaming at him now, pulling at his arm. "Tyson, stop it! We have to leave!" But he was too far gone. The alcohol and the rage had consumed him. He finally got the lighter to flick. He threw it at the puddle of gas. Whoosh! A wall of orange flame erupted in front of the door. But Tyson was standing too close. The blast of heat knocked him backward and singed his eyebrows. He scrambled away on his hands and knees, coughing. Inside, I watched the flames lick against the fire-rated steel door. I was not worried. The door was rated to withstand 2 hours of direct heat. The fire suppression system Marcus had installed in the entryway triggered automatically. Sprinklers rained down a chemical foam that smothered the fire in seconds, leaving only a hissing cloud of white smoke. Tyson sat on the wet pavement, defeated. The thugs had already jumped into the SUV and sped off, leaving him and Brittany behind. Then the blue and red lights appeared. 2 police cruisers screeched into the lot, boxing in the Range Rover that Brittany had driven. Officers poured out guns drawn, shouting commands. "Get on the ground! Hands where I can see them." I watched as Brittany immediately dropped to her knees, putting her hands behind her head, sobbing hysterically. She was shouting, "I did not do anything. He forced me." Tyson stood up slowly, swaying. He looked at the police. He looked at the smoking remains of his arson attempt. And then he looked up at the camera lens, knowing I was watching. He did not fight. He just slumped. The fight had left him. An officer tackled him to the ground, cuffing his hands behind his back. I zoomed in the camera. I wanted to see his face. I needed to remember this moment. The man who had sneered at me in the lawyer's office, the man who had told me I was worthless, was now face down in a puddle of dirty water and fire-retardant foam being read his Miranda rights. I walked away from the monitors and went down the stairs to the side entrance. I opened the door and stepped out onto the metal landing on the second floor overlooking the parking lot. The cold wind whipped my hair, but I did not feel it. "Officer," I called out. The sergeant looked up, shining his flashlight at me. "Are you the property owner, ma'am?" "Yes," I said, looking down at my brother. "That man is Tyson Jenkins. He is my brother. And I want to press full charges. Trespassing, attempted arson, destruction of property, and harassment." Tyson lifted his head from the pavement. His cheek was scraped and bleeding. "Jasmine," he croaked. "Do not do this." I pulled out my phone and hit record, capturing the scene. The flashing lights, the handcuffs, the ruin of a man who thought he was untouchable. "You did this to yourself, Tyson," I said calmly. "You tried to burn down our father's legacy because you could not sell it. You are not a builder. You are just a vandal." The police hauled him up and shoved him into the back of the cruiser. Brittany was put into the other car, still crying about her innocence. As they drove away, leaving me alone in the silence of the night, I looked back at the warehouse. The scorch marks on the door were ugly, but the door held. The structure held. Just like Dad said it would. I turned off the camera and walked back inside. The smell of smoke lingered faintly in the air, but underneath it was the smell of oil and old leather. The smell of victory. I went down to the vault and sat in the driver's seat of the Shelby. I rested my head on the steering wheel and finally let myself cry. Not tears of sadness, but tears of relief. The siege was over. The fortress had held. And tomorrow the world would know exactly who Jasmine Jenkins really was. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and misery, a stark contrast to the expensive cologne that usually followed my brother like a cloud. I sat in the front row of the gallery, my hands folded calmly in my lap, flanked by Elias Thorne. On the other side of the aisle, Tyson sat alone. Brittany was notably absent. Her high-priced divorce attorney had likely advised her to distance herself from the sinking ship that was her husband. Tyson looked smaller without his bespoke suit. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit issued by the Cook County Jail, and for the first time in his life, he looked exactly like what he was. A criminal. The hearing was short and brutal. Elias presented the video footage from the warehouse security system. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, watched the screen in silence. She saw Tyson smash the gate. She saw him pour the gasoline. She saw the fire erupt. When the video ended, she looked at Tyson with a mixture of disappointment and disgust that cut deeper than any shout. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "You are a danger to yourself and to the community. Your sister has requested a permanent order of protection. Given the evidence, I am granting it immediately. You are to stay 500 feet away from Jasmine Jenkins and the property at District 9 at all times. If you violate this order, you will go back to jail and there will be no bail." Tyson nodded, his head hanging low. He did not look at me. He could not. The judge set his bail at $500,000 cash. I watched Tyson flinch. A month ago, that amount would have been a rounding error in his bank account. Today, it was a mountain he could not climb. I learned later that he had to call a bail bondsman and put up his last remaining asset, his luxury car, as collateral just to walk out of that building. He was free pending trial, but he was broken. He walked out of the courthouse into the blinding flash of paparazzi cameras shielding his face with his handcuffed hands. The golden child had fallen, and the world was watching him hit the pavement. But I did not have time to dwell on his destruction. I had a museum to open. For the next 3 days, the warehouse was a hive of activity. I did not hire a fancy event planner from the north side. I hired the people from the neighborhood. The local mechanic shop helped me polish the cars until they shone like mirrors. The bakery down the street provided the catering. The teenagers who used to tag the back wall with graffiti helped me paint over it with a mural dedicated to African American innovation in the automotive industry. I wanted this event to be real. I wanted it to be the antithesis of the penthouse party. On Saturday night, the gates of District 9 threw open. But this time there were no thugs with crowbars. There were news vans. There were collectors flying in from Los Angeles and New York. There were city council members who had suddenly remembered how important historical preservation was. And there were the people of the South Side who had heard the rumors that old Otis Jenkins had left a treasure in their backyard. I stood at the entrance wearing a simple white suit. I greeted every guest personally. When the reporter from the Chicago Tribune asked me if I was selling the land for the new condo development, I simply smiled and invited him inside. The warehouse floor had been scrubbed clean, but I kept the industrial feel. The steel beams were exposed, the concrete was polished, but the center of attention was the elevator shaft. I had arranged for a dramatic reveal. At 7 o'clock sharp, I took the microphone. There was no stage. I stood on the floor level with everyone else. "Welcome," I said. My father, Otis Jenkins, was a man who believed in value over appearance. He believed that sometimes the most precious things are hidden beneath a rough exterior. For 40 years he collected history. He saved it when no one else wanted it. And tonight, I am proud to share his life work with you. I pressed the button on the wall. The hydraulic hum filled the room. The crowd fell silent. Slowly, majestically, the platform began to rise from the floor. First came the roof of the Shelby GT 500 glistening in midnight blue, then the hood with its white racing stripes, then the chrome bumpers. As the car fully emerged into the warehouse lights, a collective gasp went through the room. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated awe. But I was not done. I pressed the button again, and the second elevator I had reactivated brought up the 1970 Chevelle SS. Then the Hemi Cuda. One by one the beasts rose from the earth. Camera flashes erupted like a strobe light storm. The journalists were frantically typing into their phones. The automotive experts were on their knees inspecting the tires and the VIN numbers, shaking their heads in disbelief. Arthur Sterling from Sotheby's stepped forward, his voice trembling with excitement as he spoke to the press. "What you are seeing here is unprecedented," he told the cameras. "This is the single most significant discovery of classic American muscle cars in the 21st century. The condition is flawless. The history is impeccable. This is not just a car collection. This is the Holy Grail." The next morning the headlines were everywhere. But the one that mattered, the one that I framed and hung in the office, was from Forbes. The headline read, "The Hidden Queen of Chicago: How a Black Woman Turned a Scrapyard into a Kingdom." The article described the collection in lavish detail, estimating the total value at over $75 million. I sat at my father's old metal desk reading the article. My phone was blowing up with calls from investors, museums, and even Hollywood producers wanting to buy the rights to the story. I looked at the bank appraisal that had just arrived via courier. It was a formal document stamped and certified. Net asset value of the Otis Jenkins Trust, $75,400,000. I ran my finger over the number, $75 million. A week ago I had $42. A week ago my brother had thrown $5,000 at me and told me to disappear. I picked up a pen and wrote a check. It was for $5,000. I put it in an envelope and addressed it to Tyson Jenkins, care of his bail bondsman. In the memo line, I wrote simply, "For your legal defense." I did not send it out of kindness. I sent it because I wanted him to know that the amount he thought was my price was now just charity to me. I was officially the wealthiest person in the Jenkins family line. But as I looked out the window at the line of people waiting to pay $20 to see my father's cars, I knew the money was just paper. The real value was the fact that nobody would ever call Otis Jenkins a junkman again. His name was on the building, his legacy was safe, and I was the one holding the keys. However, there was one final piece of business. Elias Thorne had called me earlier that morning. He said that now that the restraining order was permanent and the asset valuation was public, Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer, had suddenly found his conscience. He had delivered a thumb drive to Elias' office. It contained the video file of my father signing the will. The video Tyson had tried to burn down the building to hide. I plugged the drive into my laptop. My hand hovered over the mouse. I had won the money. I had won the reputation. But I still needed to know the truth of why Dad had done it this way. I needed to hear his voice one last time. I took a deep breath and pressed play. The office of Henderson and Associates had not changed in the 2 weeks since the reading of the will, but the atmosphere inside the room had shifted entirely. The first time I sat in this leather chair, I was a trembling victim clutching a torn check while my brother laughed at my misfortune. Today I sat with my back straight, my hands resting calmly on the mahogany table, and the man across from me was the one sweating. Mr. Henderson looked older today. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his tie, unable to meet my gaze. He knew that I knew. He knew that Elias Thorne had cornered him with the threat of disbarment, and he knew that the woman sitting before him was no longer the poor relation, but the executor of an estate worth $75 million. I found something, Mr. Henderson said, his voice cracking slightly. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small black USB drive. It was misfiled, an administrative error. But given the recent developments and the conclusion of the legal proceedings, I felt it was my ethical duty to ensure you received it immediately. I did not smile. We both knew it was not a mistake. He had held on to it, waiting to see who would win the war between the siblings. If Tyson had crushed me, this drive would have disappeared forever. But Tyson had fallen, and Henderson was a man who knew which way the wind blew. "Play it," I said simply. He plugged the drive into his laptop and turned the screen toward me. The media player opened, and suddenly my father's face filled the frame. He was sitting in his favorite armchair in the den of the brownstone, wearing his old flannel shirt. He looked tired, his breathing slightly labored, but his eyes were sharp and clear. Seeing him alive again, even on a screen, sent a jolt of grief through my chest, so potent I had to grip the arms of the chair to keep from crying out. "Hello, kids," Dad said, his voice rumbled with that familiar warmth. "If you are watching this video, then I am gone. And if you are watching this, it means the dust has settled on the reading of my will." I know there was probably shouting. I know there were probably tears. Tyson. I know you probably laughed when you heard what I left your sister. On the screen, Dad leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "I did not divide my assets based on who I loved more. I loved you both, but I divided them based on who you are." Tyson. "I gave you the penthouse because you have always loved the shine of things. You like the view from the top, but you never understood that a penthouse is a liability. It costs money to heat, it costs money to clean, and the taxes never stop. It is a hungry beast, Tyson. I gave it to you to see if you could discipline yourself enough to feed it, or if you would let it eat you alive." I watched, captivated. Dad had known. He had known about Tyson spending his gambling, his need for validation. And Jasmine. Dad continued, his eyes softening as he looked into the camera lens. "I gave you the warehouse because you are the only one who knows how to look past the rust. You know that a building is not defined by its paint job, but by its foundation. The warehouse is an asset. It is ugly, but it protects value. It generates possibilities." He paused, taking a long breath. "This was the final test. The final lesson I could teach you. I knew the land under that warehouse was valuable. I knew what I buried in the vault. If Tyson had been a good brother, if he had helped you, if he had said, 'Jasmine, let us work together,' then you would have shared the wealth. The trust was designed to unlock only if the siblings remained united. But I also knew there was a chance greed would blind him." Dad sighed, a heavy sound of resignation. "So I added the contingency clause. If Tyson tried to take the warehouse from you, if he tried to force you out or sell the land for quick cash, he would fail the test. The penthouse would expose his debts, and the warehouse would become yours entirely. I hoped I was wrong about him. I hoped he would prove me wrong. But if you are watching this video alone, Jasmine, it means he failed. And it means you are the keeper of the flame now. Do not let the money change you, baby girl. Keep your hands greasy. Keep your head low. And never forget that structure is what survives the storm. The screen went black. I sat in the silence, the tears finally spilling over my cheeks. It was not just a will. It was a masterclass in parenting from beyond the grave. Dad had not abandoned me. He had armed me. He had set a trap for Tyson's vanity and built a fortress for my integrity. I stood up and took the drive from the laptop. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice steady. "I trust you will send my brother a copy. He needs to see this." Across town in the gray concrete visiting room of the Cook County Jail, Tyson Jenkins sat in an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. He looked 10 years older than he had a week ago. The arrogance was gone, scraped away by the reality of a $500,000 bail bond and the impending fraud charges. His lawyer sat across from him, looking bored, holding a tablet. "Your sister sent this," the lawyer said, sliding the tablet across the metal table. "She said you needed to watch it before the plea negotiations begin." Tyson looked at the screen. He saw his father's face. He heard the words, liability and asset. He heard the man he had spent his whole life trying to impress tell him that his inheritance had been a test he had failed spectacularly. Tyson watched the video 3 times. The first time he watched with confusion. The second time with denial. But the third time, the truth hit him like a physical blow to the gut. The penthouse was a liability, the warehouse was an asset. It was so simple. It was the first rule of business, the first rule of wealth, and he had ignored it because he was too busy looking at himself in the mirror. He remembered the night of the fire. He remembered screaming that he wanted to burn it down. He realized now that he had been trying to burn down the only thing that could have saved him. If he had just been kind. If he had just offered to help me fix up the roof. If he had just treated me like a sister instead of a nuisance, we would have opened that vault together. We would be splitting $75 million right now. Instead, he was sitting in a cage wearing borrowed clothes, waiting to find out if he would spend the next 5 years in prison. He put his head in his hands, and for the first time in his life, Tyson Jenkins wept. He did not cry for the money. He cried because he finally understood that his father had seen right through him. He cried because he realized that the poverty he had mocked me for was actually a richness of character he had never possessed. Back in the city, I walked out of the law office and onto the busy sidewalk. The wind off Lake Michigan was cold, but I did not button my coat. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to feel the reality of the world. I hailed a cab, not a limousine. I gave the driver the address of the warehouse. As we drove south, leaving the gleaming towers of the loop behind, I thought about Dad's final words. "Keep your hands greasy." I looked at my hands. They were manicured now, soft from lotion. But I knew that tomorrow I would be back in the vault. I would be putting on my coveralls. I would be cataloging parts and checking oil levels. I was a millionaire on paper, but in my heart, I was still the mechanic's daughter, and that was the only title that mattered. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank. The trust fund transfer was complete. The numbers on the screen were astronomical. But I closed the app and opened my photo gallery instead. I found a picture of me and Dad from years ago, standing in front of the old tow truck, both of us covered in soot, smiling like we owned the world. "We did own the world," I whispered to the picture. "We just didn't know it yet." The cab pulled up to the gates of District 9. The sign above the door still had missing letters. The brick was still weathered. To anyone driving by, it looked like an eyesore. But as I unlocked the gate and walked onto the property, I saw it for what it truly was. It was a monument to the truth. It was a lesson in concrete and steel. And it was home. I walked into the center of the warehouse and looked down at the floor where the vault lay hidden. I knew Tyson was sitting in a cell thinking about what he had lost. I felt a pang of pity for him, but it was fleeting. He had made his choices. He had chosen the shine over the substance. I went to the wall and flipped the breaker switch. The lights hummed to life. I was ready to get back to work. There were 40 cars down there that needed to be preserved. There was a legacy to protect. And somewhere out there in the city, there were other kids like me, other black sheep who were being told they were worthless. I had a lot of work to do. And I had 75 million reasons to believe that I could change everything. The lesson was over. The work was just beginning. The downfall of Tyson Jenkins was not a loud explosion, but a slow and humiliating suffocation. It began on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after the video of our father destroyed his world. I was not there to see it, but the doorman at the Millennium Tower, who had always liked me more than he liked my brother, filled me in on the details later. He told me that 2 sheriff deputies arrived at the lobby at 9 o'clock sharp, accompanied by a representative from the bank. They did not take the service elevator. They took the main lift straight to the penthouse. When Tyson opened the door, he was still wearing the same clothes he had worn the day before. He looked like a ghost haunting his own life. The bank representative handed him a foreclosure notice and gave him exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises. Tyson tried to argue. He tried to scream about his rights and his lawyers, but the deputies just stood there with their hands on their belts, unmoved by the tantrums of a bankrupt man. They watched as he threw a few suits and a pair of shoes into a garbage bag. He was not allowed to take the furniture. He was not allowed to take the artwork. Those things belonged to the creditors now. As he was escorted out of the building, the neighbors he had spent years trying to impress watched from their doorways. They did not offer to help. They whispered and stared, treating him like a disease they were afraid to catch. But the worst blow did not come from the bank. It came from Brittany. Tyson had spent the last of his energy trying to call her, hoping that his wife would offer him a place to stay, or at least a shoulder to cry on. But Brittany was already gone. When Tyson tried to access the wall safe in the master bedroom before he was evicted, he found it wide open and empty. The diamond earrings he had bought her for their anniversary were gone. The vintage Cartier watch was gone. Even the cash reserve he kept for emergencies had been swept clean. On the kitchen counter, sitting next to the eviction notice, was a process server envelope containing divorce papers. She cited irreconcilable differences and spousal fraud. She did not even have the decency to leave a note. She had simply packed her bags, taken the last items of value he possessed, and vanished to her mother's house in Florida, leaving him to face the ruin alone. Tyson walked out of the Millennium Tower with a black plastic trash bag over his shoulder. It was raining, a cold, relentless Chicago drizzle that soaked through his shirt. He checked his phone. He had 17 missed calls, but none of them were from friends. They were all from creditors. He tried to call his former business partners, the men he had drank scotch with and laughed with at the club. One by one, they sent him to voicemail. The word was out. Tyson Jenkins was toxic. He was not just broke, he was blacklisted. In the tight-knit world of Chicago, finance reputation is currency, and Tyson had spent his counterfeit. No firm would hire him. No bank would loan him money. He was radioactive. For 3 days he slept in his car until the repo man took that too. He spent the next 2 nights on a couch in the basement of a distant cousin who only let him stay because he remembered Dad. But even that charity ran out when Tyson started complaining about the quality of the food. He was a man who had fallen from the stratosphere and hit the pavement, but his ego was still bruising every time he touched the ground. On the 6th day, the rain turned into a storm. I was at the museum finishing up a meeting with the board of directors for the new scholarship fund. The warehouse was glowing warm and inviting against the gray sky. The neon sign that read Otis Auto Museum buzzed with a steady, reassuring hum. I was locking the front entrance, ready to go home to my new apartment, when I saw a figure standing by the gate. He was soaking wet. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his expensive coat was stained with mud. He was shivering violently, not just from the cold, but from a deep internal shaking. that looked like withdrawal from a life of privilege. It took me a moment to recognize him. The golden child, the prince of the family. I opened the gate and walked out under my umbrella. I did not invite him in. I stood 5 feet away, maintaining the boundary the judge had set, but also the boundary my heart required. "What do you want, Tyson?" I asked. My voice was not angry. It was just tired. Tyson looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He looked past me at the warm light spilling from the warehouse windows. He could see the Shelby sitting on its pedestal inside, gleaming like a jewel. He could see the life he had thrown away. "Jasmine," he croaked, his voice rough from disuse, "I have nowhere to go. Brittany took everything. The bank took the condo. I am sleeping at the bus station." I said nothing. I just waited. "I need a job," he said. He tried to stand up straighter, to summon some shred of his old authority, but it crumbled instantly. "I know the building, Jasmine. I know the security codes. I can work the night shift. I can be a security guard. I will watch the cars. I will make sure nobody breaks in. Just pay me minimum wage. I just need a place to be. Please, I am your brother." He took a step toward me, reaching out a hand. It was the same hand that had ripped up the check, the same hand that had pointed to the door and told me to get out. I looked at him, and I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. It was grieving not for the man standing in front of me, but for the brother I wished I had. The brother Dad had wanted him to be. But then I remembered the fire. I remembered the gas can. I remembered the look in his eyes when he screamed that he wanted to burn it all down. "Dad left us a test, Tyson," I said softly, "and you failed it. I can change," he pleaded, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "I learned my lesson. I swear, let me protect the legacy. Let me guard the cars." I shook my head slowly. "You cannot protect what you do not value, Tyson. You do not want to guard these cars because you love them. You want to be close to them because they are worth money. You are still looking at the price tag, not the structure." I closed my umbrella and stepped back toward the door. "You are not fit to be the security guard here," I said, my voice cold and final. "You are the very danger this building was built to keep out. You tried to sell it. You tried to burn it. You are not the guardian. You are the threat." Tyson fell to his knees in the mud. "Jasmine, please do not leave me here. It is cold." I paused, my hand on the heavy steel door. "I know it is cold, Tyson," I said without looking back. "It was cold the night you threw my suitcase into the snow too, but I survived because I had something inside me that kept me warm. You have nothing." I walked inside and closed the door. The sound of the lock sliding home was heavy and absolute. Through the security monitor, I watched him for a moment. He stayed on his knees for a long time, staring at the closed door of the kingdom he had forfeited. Eventually, he stood up. He pulled his ruined coat tighter around his shoulders and turned away. He walked down the dark street, his figure getting smaller and smaller in the rain. He looked exactly like I had looked that night weeks ago, dragging my suitcase into the unknown. But there was a difference. I had walked toward a future I was willing to build. Tyson was walking into a void he had created. I turned away from the screen and looked out at the museum floor. The cars were safe. The legacy was safe. The storm was raging outside, but inside the structure held strong. I turned off the lights in the office, leaving only the soft glow of the security system. As I walked to my car, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The collapse was complete. The rubble had been cleared, and now finally the rebuilding could truly begin. The neon sign above the entrance to District 9 no longer flickers. It hums with a steady electric blue light that spells out the Otis Jenkins Center for Automotive Culture. It has been exactly 1 year since I stood in the rain and watched my brother walk away into the darkness. In that year, the seasons have changed, and so has the skyline of the South Side. The luxury condo tower next door finally broke ground, but it is no longer the main attraction. The real draw is the old brick warehouse that everyone wanted to tear down. I stood on the mezzanine level, looking down at the museum floor. It was a Tuesday morning, but the place was packed. A group of high school students from the local technical college was gathered around the 1970 Chevelle, listening to a docent explain the intricacies of the cowl induction system. These were not just tourists, they were the future. I did not sell the collection. I could have liquidated everything and bought an island in the Caribbean, but that would have been the Tyson move. Instead, I sold 3 duplicate models to private collectors for $12 million. I used that money to renovate the building, install climate control, and set up an endowment fund. The rest of the cars stayed right here. They are not just pretty objects, they are teachers. I walked down the stairs, the heels of my boots clicking on the polished concrete. A young man named Marcus was waiting for me by the reception desk. He was 18 years old, wearing a backpack that looked like it had been through a war, and holding an acceptance letter to MIT. He was the first recipient of the Otis Jenkins Engineering Scholarship. I handed him the check. It covered his tuition, his room, and his board for 4 years. His hands were shaking just like mine had shook the day I found the vault. "You do not have to pay this back, Marcus," I told him. "You just have to pay it forward, build something that lasts." He hugged me tight, and for a moment I felt my father's presence in the room. This was what the legacy was for. It was not about hoarding chrome and steel, it was about using the past to fuel the future. As Marcus walked away, wiping his eyes, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Julian. He was not a financier, he was not a lawyer, he was an architect who specialized in historic preservation. We had met 6 months ago when I was looking for someone to restore the original brick facade of the warehouse without destroying its character. Julian did not look at the warehouse and see a teardown. He saw the bones. He saw the beauty. "Ready for lunch?" he asked, his smile warm and genuine. I checked my watch. "Actually, I have one more thing to do. Take a walk with me." We walked through the gallery past the rows of gleaming muscle cars. Julian stopped in front of the Hemikuda, admiring the lines. He did not ask how much it was worth. He asked about the suspension geometry. That was why I liked him. He valued the way things worked, not just what they cost. He treated me with a quiet respect that I was not used to. He did not care about the millions in the trust fund. He cared about the woman who had spent nights sleeping in a cold car to protect her family history. We walked out the back exit to the private garage where I kept my daily driver. It was not a sensible sedan anymore. It was the 1967 Shelby GT 500 Super Snake. The blue paint looked like liquid water under the sun. The white racing stripes were sharp and aggressive. Julian whistled low. "You are taking the beast out today." I tossed my bag into the passenger seat. "I need to clear my head. Do you want to come?" He laughed. "I value my life too much to get in that car when you have that look in your eye. Go. I will see you at dinner." He kissed my cheek and I watched him walk back toward the museum. It felt good to be seen, not as a victim, not as a bank account, but as a woman who had built her own world. I slid into the driver's seat of the Shelby. The smell of vintage leather and high-octane fuel filled my senses. It was the smell of victory. I turned the key. The massive V8 engine roared to life, a deep guttural thunder that shook the pavement. I revved it once, letting the sound echo off the brick walls. I pulled out of the gate and turned onto the main avenue heading toward Lakeshore Drive. As I accelerated, the city blurred past me. I drove past the courthouse where I had won my freedom. I drove past the law office where I had learned the truth. I drove past the bus station where I had last seen Tyson. I heard he had moved to Indiana working at a car wash. I hoped he was finding some peace in the soap and water. I hoped he was learning that you cannot wash away who you are, but you can always scrub off the dirt and start over. I merged onto the highway, the lake stretching out to my right, endless and blue. I shifted gears, the car leaping forward with terrifying power. I was going fast, but I was in total control. I thought about the girl who had stood in the snow with a suitcase full of old clothes. I thought about the woman who had been laughed at in a boardroom. They felt like strangers to me now. I had shed those skins. My father was right. The penthouse was a cage. The warehouse was a fortress. But the car was freedom. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I did not see fear. I did not see anger. I saw calm. Value is a strange thing. People think it is a number on a spreadsheet. They think it is the label on your dress or the zip code of your house. They spend their whole lives chasing it, trying to buy it, trying to wear it. But they are wrong. Value is not what you own. It is what you protect. It is what you stand for when the rest of the world tells you to sit down. It is the grit under your fingernails and the steel in your spine. It is the ability to look at a pile of rust and see a kingdom. My name is Jasmine Jenkins. I am not a mechanic. I am not a curator. I am the keeper of the flame. And as long as I am driving, this fire will never go out. I pressed the accelerator to the floor. The engine screamed a symphony of American horsepower. The city skyline rose ahead of me, shining in the sun. I was not running away from anything anymore. I was driving toward everything. The screen fades to black as the sound of the engine fades into the distance, leaving only the sound of the wind. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that their worth is not defined by how others treat them. And let me know in the comments below, what is the one thing in your life that you would fight to protect? Thank you for watching, and remember to always look beneath the surface.